My father moved to America when I was in 8th grade. We were originally from Liverpool. I was born and raised Geordie, and to get out of Liverpool and to go all the way to America was a very big transition for me, both education-wise and culturally. Even though we are at an extent quite same, but there are certain differences that are major, and one of the crucial major differences that had a major effect on my life was of football. Now, being a lad from Liverpool, football is something that is very close to our hearts. It is like we are born with the genetics of football passion in us, and coming to America, I had no idea football was a thing. To keep in mind, this was before internet was a thing, so there were a lot of things that we had no clue about. We moved to America in May, and it was a tiring move. My father recently started working for the New York Times, so we had to move, and since he was given a decent place to live in, it was just me and my dad. And I was to start the school early, and it was a new school in the New York, and definitely it was fancier than the public school back in Liverpool. The first day of the school was not something that I would have thought it to be. It was in high school with a curriculum that was a bit difficult for me to understand. Classes were going everywhere, and we had to move so much from one class to another. I had no idea where to go or what to sign. It was too much, and too many classes, and I never had all of that in Liverpool, so I was a tad bit confused about everything. And so there was this sports sheet that I got, and in there was written football, and somehow everything felt right. Football was my calling, and I picked it up quick. It was certain that football was the only thing that was common thing between New York and Liverpool, and I got back all excited and told my father, and he was not happy and was a bit annoyed and asked me, "What are you going to do to be an NFL star?" I never understood half the things my father told me, and I told him that I am in for the trials, and he said, "You're a scrawny little Georgie, you'll get battered there." And I said to Dad, "They are Yanks, I will get them." And the next day, one of the guys from the classes helped me with the football thing and gave me this weird kit to wear. I just ignored and wore my usual shorts and jersey and went out. And as I went out on the pitch, I saw really built up guys, and there was something different about the pitch. There were no goal stands. The ball was not even red, and the pitch was like that of rugby, and I realized what happened. I couldn't believe they called rugby football. I wanted to get away from the pitch, but they dragged me in. I wasn't sure why, but they dragged me in the game. The coach went crazy and screamed, "All right, we're going to make men out of you boys." And then he looked at me and screamed, "Come here, Oliver Twist, show us what you got." And he called me and told me to tackle one of his guys. And I just didn't understand what was going on. And then one of his guys ran and tackled me hard, and I dropped dead in that exact moment. Everything blacked out as I fell. I woke up later, and by the time I did, the games were over. I wasn't selected, and the boys were out there making fun of me, and I asked them, "Why do you call it football? That is not football." And then one of the guys says, "This is American football. It is played like that." And then I said, "Football is not this. Liverpool Manchester United, now that's football." And they were pissed and smacked me. These Yanks punished me for not liking their game, even though their game was nothing like how games should be. And they told me to play their game. And in my cockiness, I decided that I will do it. And we went to the pitch. The game started, and it wasn't like the football that I was used to, but there was a lot of running in the pitch. I found myself in the pitch, and I was ready to take the game. The ball was in my hand. It was already a free kick if it was a real football, and I ran through the pitch into the goal thing, and they told me to drop the ball, and I did. They were cheering and calling touchdown. I was busy saying this is not the real football no matter what, and there wasn't even a whistle. One of the guys handed me the ball, and the other guy who was heavy tackled me hard and fell upon me. And as he did, I shouted in pain, and as I heard something pop, and there I saw the bone in left hand and leg popped out as a 200-pound kid fell upon my scrawny body, and I was shouting and in pain, and then passed out due to the pain. I woke up, and I saw us in the hospital. My father wasn't really there. He was out covering a news in another state. So it was me in the shady old New York hospital. The physical pain of broken bones was way less than the pain that I felt of being alone, and no one there. That is when I realized, of all the places, America is one of the places that I would never visit if I ever get back to Liverpool, and NFL still should work on it and not call itself a football league. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
The morning of September 23, 1904 was marked by gray, ominous clouds that blanketed the skies of Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was raining at around 10:15 a.m. when the principal of Pleasant Ridge School, Thomas L. Zimmerman, rang the bell for morning recess. Zimmerman figured a little rain wouldn't do the children any harm as they scattered into groups and began games of baseball and partook in general tomfoolery. But the principal had seriously misjudged how fast and how strong the rain would come. And not just the rain either. A full-on storm was quickly approaching. A few minutes later, the wind picked up while a heavy rain began to fall on the schoolyard. Most of the children ran for the school building to save themselves from being soaked through, but a group of about 30 young girls made a break for the outhouse on the opposite side of the schoolyard. The outhouse was a 10-foot square framed building positioned over a 12-foot deep stone vault on the eastern side of the schoolyard. It was only 11 years old, but had to be repaired several times because of shoddy construction. It was designed for maybe only a handful of students at any one time, but on that day, just over 30 young girls were trying to squeeze into the cramped, dank space. Suddenly, and without warning, the floor on one side of the building, rotten from years of moisture, gave way, and the entire floor of the privy crashed to the bottom of the vault, taking all 30 or so of the terrified young women with it. The floor fell almost 8 feet vertically and completely shattered, sending children as young as 7 into a huge pool of sewage water that was around 4 feet deep. There was no crash at all, 12-year-old Elsie Ferguson later said. There was no noise whatsoever, the floor just fell. That's all there was to it. Not a child scream that I'd heard. I felt the floor going and jumped quickly, clutching to the side of the door. I was left hanging on it, and with all my strength I pulled myself up and out of that place. A handful of the other girls managed to escape the same way, climbing up onto the toilet seat to make room for the others before making it to a doorway. But not all were so fortunate. Raw panic ensued, and the tragic accident quickly became a battle for their lives. The girls were unwittingly pitted against each other in a struggle for survival as they tried to climb out of the 4-foot deep pool of human excrement, with the weaker girls crushed down by the stronger peers as they were forced under to drown in the mass of filth. You see, a mass drowning is perhaps one of the darkest, most horrifying things a person can experience, because during a panic like that, survival mechanics in the human brain kick in, and a person will find any kind of leverage at all to stay above water. This means that people will literally drag each other underwater, climbing atop each other's drowning bodies in order to stay afloat and breathing air. And this is exactly what happened during the tragedy that day. Girls were actually drowning each other in a desperate bid to stay alive. A young woman by the name of Lorena Ferguson was rushing into the outhouse just moments after the floor gave way, stopping dead in her tracks when she saw the horrific scene below. Seconds later, she turned on her heels and ran back into the schoolhouse to fetch help. A few minutes later, 2 of the girls ran into the room and exclaimed that a girl had fallen into the vault. Principal Zimmerman later told a local newspaper, "I didn't realize the awful calamity that had overcome us, but hurried in the direction of the outbuilding. On the way, I met a number of others. They were screaming wildly at the top of their voices, and it was some time before one of them could compose herself sufficiently to explain what had happened. Another young woman ran to one of the high school classrooms, which was still in session, and alerted one of the teachers there of the outhouse's collapse. Then she and 4 high school boys bolted toward the outhouse, arriving at roughly the same time as Principal Zimmerman, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to discover. The sight of terrified young women scrambling up the walls of the collapsed outhouse, covered in human filth, was almost too much to bear. Others further down were literally swimming in week-old fecal matter, struggling to keep their head above the mass of excrement. The sight alone was bad enough, but the cacophony of screams was almost deafening. All of the girls were screeching at the top of their lungs, their cries intermittent with the sounds of gagging and retching. 2 young men were across the street in the Presbyterian church with a few others when they heard the terrified screeching of the girls running away from the outhouse in the pouring rain. As they exited the church to see what all the commotion was about, they began to hear the faint screams of the girls trapped in the vault beneath the outhouse. They heard the desperate screams of "Mama, Papa, help us." Then, without as much as a word between them, the occupants of the church ran out into the rain and over to the girls' outhouse. There they found Principal Zimmerman, standing in a narrow doorway to the outhouse, looking half mad with anguish, pale with panic and unsure what to do. The men shoved him aside and got to work. They began calling out to any nearby to fetch ropes and ladders, anything that could help them fish the girls out from the pile of human waste. Zimmerman himself dropped to the ground near the open doorway, trying as best he could to reach some of the girls with just his arm, but it was impossible. They were way out of reach. Then some of the men who ran to help grabbed him by the legs and lowered him further down into the recess. This helped him rescue 3 of the girls before any rescue equipment even arrived, and probably saved the man a lifetime of guilt in the process, given that he had panicked so awfully in the initial stages of the rescue attempt. Especially given that the step ladders brought over for the school were far too short, and the ropes brought over were nothing but clotheslines which snapped uselessly as the girls attempted to climb up them. While I was waiting for a longer ladder, Zimmerman later said, I begged the children to be quiet and brave, and I would rescue them. Some of the older girls followed his commands, attempted to calm the younger ones, but it was no good. Panic had well and truly taken hold. The ladders and clotheslines repeatedly failed, and the rescuers were forced to rethink their strategy. Using quick thinking, one of the men climbed into the steeple of the nearby church and unfurled the rope off the church bell. This was much more effective a tool and helped save the lives of 2 more of the girls. Another one of the rescuers found a long ladder in a nearby barn and helped Principal Zimmerman dip it into the muck. It was not long enough to reach all the way from the bottom of the vault, but it was long enough for Zimmerman and some of the other men to descend and lift the girls out of the mess. The girls that were pulled out of the mess were almost unrecognizable. Their eyes clenched tightly shut as they wept hysterically, gasping for breath and trying to uselessly clean the stinking waste off themselves. The struggle down there was terrible, said a survivor named Hazel Senior, in the aftermath of the disaster. As long as I could get out of the water and take a breath of air, I felt sure of being saved. But when I fell back into the hole, I thought it was over. The girls about me were grabbing onto me. Everyone grabbed at each other, and when we did get a hold on the wall, it was only for a second. I caught hold several times, but when I was pulled at by the others, my hand slipped. There was only a few taken out when I felt something under my feet. It must have been some little girl that had drowned. All the time I prayed. I said my prayers over and over. I could not see after a while, and as I was praying to the Lord to save me, I found the rake in my hands. When I came into the light, I saw Principal Zimmerman. I crawled up and was lifted out. After struggling in the violent frenzy among the pit of disgusting fecal matter, 14-year-old Edna Gerke again found a purchase among the brickwork and made one final attempt to pull herself out. Far above me, it seemed somebody was coming down a ladder and called to me. Suddenly someone took hold of me. I looked back over my shoulder and saw the agonized faces of my friends, then lost consciousness and knew no more until I woke up in the schoolroom, surrounded by the bodies of my friends. Gerke's arms were horribly bruised and torn up by deep scratches. Wounds she said were down to the clawing attempts of her classmates to climb over her out of the stinking mess of filth. The rainstorm ceased not long after. But the break in the weather did little to relieve the chaos that was unfolding on the schoolyard. A fair few of the girls passed out not long after emerging from the sewage, adding the fear that they had succumbed to the terrible fumes of the cesspit they had fallen into. But thankfully, neighbors of the school offered up their homes as treatment centers, with rescuers carrying girls to the safety of houses where they were revived, cleaned up, and comforted after such a harrowing ordeal. After Zimmerman helped the 19th and final girl off the ladder and watched other rescuers carry her away into the schoolhouse for treatment, he leaned inside the shattered outhouse and peered into the dark, silent cesspit. All he could see were broken pieces of outhouse floor floating around in the surface of the foul water. As he realized the task was over and the adrenaline began to fade, he could have easily fallen into the cesspit himself if it wasn't for other rescuers coming to check on him. But then it was early afternoon, and the sun had finally broken through the clouds, shedding an oddly warm light on such a horrific scene of chaos, filth, and death. The gathered mass of onlookers and rescuers doubled as relatives began streaming in from downtown Cincinnati. It had taken only an hour or so for word-of-mouth accounts of the fatal collapse to reach the wider citizenry. When they heard the news, Pleasant Ridge residents who happened to be working downtown ran back to the village, where they were met with the sight of the frantic children and mothers of the victims, who were congregated in the front of the school. Many of the girls were vomiting blood, and a local doctor in attendance was not sure if they would survive the afternoon. Frantic confusion continued for several more hours as more and more people arrived from nearby villages, although most of the girls who crammed into the privy lived in Pleasant Ridge. The routes between the school and the train stations were crammed with people. The village telephone system proved inadequate to keep up with the demand, and hundreds of people crowded around every available phone, waiting to find if their daughter was among those affected. When the adrenaline rush of the rescue abated, Principal Zimmerman and his teachers sobbed along with the parents who lost their daughters. Local medical staff looked at the exhausted and emotionally distraught principal and ordered him to a house across the street to rest. One of the doctors remained there the remainder of the afternoon, suffering from a severe headache brought on by the tension and the hours he spent inhaling the noxious fumes emitted from the caked bodies of the drowned girls. On the Sunday morning of the drowned girls' funeral, every church bell in Pleasant Ridge rang continuously from 9 a.m. when the first funeral started until 4 p.m. when the last of the 4 girls buried that day were put to rest. 4 school friends of Emma Steinkamp, the first victim to be buried, had been tapped to be her pallbearers. The girls were bearing flowers dressed in white as they walked alongside, but after carrying the tiny casket to the front of the German Evangelical Church, they were too grief-stricken to carry on any further, so 4 local boys took over instead. The reverend of the Methodist Church tried to calm the sobbing crowd, but one grandmother fell weeping against the small casket, and Emma's mother fainted with a deafening shriek. At that point, 2 of the girls in white became hysterical and their parents carried them from the scene. The entire town and a fair portion of the rest of Cincinnati followed the hearse to the cemetery. It had been the most horrifying, revolting tragedy in the entirety of Cincinnati's recent history, one that the townsfolk would never forget. And the deaths were made all the more terrible by the fact that they had occurred in a pit of human sewage, a fate that no single person could ever deserve, let alone an innocent young girl.
Man, you have to come in the reunion. It won't be fun without you. It was my best friend Eric from high school. He had called me to inform me about our high school reunion. Who else is coming? I asked. Everyone is coming, bro, so you have to come too. What about Martin? I asked, and there was a silence for a minute, and then Eric spoke. Did you not hear? Martin's dead, bro. I could not understand what to reply after hearing this. I know you must be confused, so let me tell you a little backstory. There was a boy in our class who was a bit of a book nerd. His name was Finn White. There was a group of 4 boys, Wilson, Harris, Andrew, and Martin, who often bullied him. They used to make him run on errands for them, writing insults and sticking it on his back. Their bullying did not stop only on that, but they often beat Finn after school. There was an alley behind the school. They used to take him there and make him stand on his knees for hours. While he used to do that, they would smoke and pass insults about him and his parents. Everyone knew about Finn being bullied, but kept silent. The teachers ignored and let them bully Finn. Instead of stopping, the bullying only kept getting worse day by day. One day during a lunch break, I heard Finn scream. Everyone, along with me, turned around and saw that Finn was freaking out. I looked down a bit and saw someone had replaced his lunch with insects in his lunchbox. Wilson and Martin came laughing as if it was funny, and both of them put his hands around his shoulders. Then all of a sudden, Martin said while laughing, "Eat it." We thought he was just joking, but then he actually forcefully fed it to him, and we got shocked. I felt sick and left the room, and when I came back, I saw Martin was laughing and Finn was throwing up. Even Wilson, who often bullied Finn, looked shocked by Martin's behavior. One day during math class, the teacher gave us a problem on the board. It was a difficult one. The teacher called Martin to solve it. He couldn't. Then the teacher asked the whole class, "Whoever knows how to solve this problem, raise your hand." It was Finn who raised his hand. The teacher called him and asked him to solve it. Finn solved the problem correctly and was praised by the teacher, but Martin felt humiliated by that, and as soon as the teacher left, he grabbed Finn by the hair and started punching and kicking him. We went rushing toward them and pulled him away from Finn. He glared at us and left. The next day, Martin was called into the teacher's office and was warned that if it continued any further, he will get suspended. They stopped bullying Finn at school, but after school, they used to take him every day and beat him. One time, I saw naked Finn trying to cover himself while Martin had his clothes, and other boys were making a video of him. The reason I never interfered with them was that I was scared if I say something, they will start bullying me too. And I think other students must be thinking the same. They threatened Finn that they will release the video if he didn't do as they say. These things kept happening, but Martin was the one who always used to take the bullying too far. Finn started to look weaker and depressed than usual. He started skipping schools, and whenever he did, the next day the bullying would just get doubled. But then, all of a sudden, he stopped coming to school. We all thought he must be skipping as usual, but the third day, instead of Finn, the principal came to inform us that he made the decision to end his misery. All the class went silent and started to look toward Martin. He noticed everyone looked at him, and he shouted, "Hey, I'm not the only one who used to bully Finn." He looked at Wilson, Harris, and Andrew after saying that, but they turned their gazes away. After that day, they stopped hanging out with Martin. Other students started to call him names, and now he was the center of attention. They all blamed him for Finn's death. Several incidents started to occur with him, such as his locker would be filled with threatening letters, and killers would be written over his locker's door. Martin stopped speaking. He would silently come to class and silently leave. I was also among those who blamed him for Finn's death, but I never did those things to him. His ex-best friend Wilson was among those who used to stick killer on his desk and would often address him as a killer. At one point, I stopped blaming him and started pitying him because he was also getting bullied by the whole school. Martin was not the only one to blame for Finn's death. Martin's friends who bullied him along with him were to blame as well, and so were the rest of us and the teachers for not stepping up to put a stop over this. Finn must be hoping for others to help, and can't tell since when Finn was planning on killing himself. It must be the case that after losing all hopes of getting help, he made the decision to end his misery. Now it was the Martin who was facing criticism and getting bullied by the other kids. One day, Martin's parents came to school to ask about his son. They told the teachers that he is distancing himself from others, and after coming from school, he just locks himself in his room. And after hearing that his son bullied a kid to this extent, they went back in disappointment. Martin eventually dropped out of high school during the end of senior year, and I never heard about him ever since. My family moved to a different state as soon as I graduated, so I had no idea what happened to him. The bullied and the bully both are dead, and there are several other cases like this all around the world because of negligence of teachers who don't take action against bullying. 20% of middle schoolers and high schoolers are victims of bullying each year. Less adult supervision provides more opportunity to bully or be bullied.